Believe it or not, this started as a bright, cheerful medieval town, but I'm building a dungeon crawler, and I needed something darker. Not just an area, but a place that feels heavy, worn, slightly dangerous. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I took a standard medieval asset pack and transformed it into the gritty, stylized town you're seeing now, using lighting, color grading, and a few simple changes that completely shift the mood. Because sometimes the difference between generic and memorable is just intention. Alright, so here is what we're starting with. This is the medieval town pack I'm using. Now, as you can see, it's normally about $100, but I actually grabbed it through a Humble Bundle deal. And honestly, the art direction is great. The shapes are strong, the details are clean. It just leans way too bright and cheerful for what I want. For Grimstone, I'm aiming for something more stylized but gritty. A town that feels worn, torchlit, and a little unsafe at night. Let's jump into Unity and import the pack and start shaping the vibe. So as you can see here, as I import this pack, I'm going to go ahead and actually uncheck all the HDRP assets. Since we're in a URP project here, we don't need those. So once we open the sample scene up, you'll notice some textures aren't rendering correctly, that bright pink terrain. That's just because this pack was authored for HDRP and we're working in URP. But fortunately it's only the terrain material and we're going to replace that anyway. The first thing I'm going to do here is create a new terrain material using the URP lit shader and then assign it to the terrain, and that will immediately clean up the pink texture issue. The next step is stripping the scene back. So first I'm going to be removing all of the vegetation, and I was actually a little surprised to see the grass implemented as tree instances instead of terrain details, which threw me off for a minute, but once I realized that, it was easy to just brush everything away. And this is important. Bright animated grass instantly makes the scene feel alive and safe, and that's not what we want. And from there, I started removing anything that felt cheerful or abundant. Apples, hanging sausage, little food stands, balcony displays. If the town is supposed to feel worn down and slightly distressed, it shouldn't look well stocked and comfortable. We're not just deleting props, we're changing the story of the place. Next, I wanted to contain the town, both visually and mechanically. I don't want the player wandering off into empty space beyond the scene, so instead of just dropping invisible colliders, I'm going to build a natural barrier. Now I'm reusing some of the wooden planks from this house and assembling them into a rough fence at the town exit. This way it blends seamlessly with the existing art style, feels intentional, and still does a practical job of keeping the player inside the playable space. Whenever possible, I like solving gameplay constraints with world building instead of invisible walls. I also tightened the layout. The original spacing felt open and welcoming, so I moved the houses closer together and closed gaps with some large boulders. This helps contain the playable space, but more importantly, it makes the town feel more claustrophobic and controlled, which fits the darker tone that I'm going for. Next, I switch over to shaded view, and immediately you can see the biggest problem, the sunlight. It's extremely bright, warm, and cheerful. That works great for a marketplace scene, but not for a gritty dungeon crawler hub. So the first thing I do is lower the intensity and shift the color temperature darker and cooler. That alone starts to pull the entire mood in a different direction. I also noticed the scene was filled with dozens of individual point lights that were kind of scattered throughout, so those were boosting the brightness even more, so I removed them entirely. Before you add atmosphere, sometimes you have to subtract light. As I continue adjusting the directional light, I cool the color temperature further until it starts to feel more like moonlight instead of sunlight. That subtle shift in color completely changes how the materials read. Then I rotate the light angle to control how the shadows fall through the streets. I'm not just darkening the scene, I'm shaping it. Direction of light determines which areas feel exposed and which feel hidden. And in a space like this, shadow is doing just as much storytelling as the assets themselves. Now that the ambient lighting is in a good place, the town is dark, maybe a little too dark. This is where contrast becomes important. Instead of flooding the scene with general light again, I'm going to introduce localized warmth using torches. I'm pulling in a free stylized fire VFX package for the flame itself, and I'll pair that with a torch model from the Mystic Dungeon pack. It also includes some fortress walls, which we'll use later when we build out the dungeon entrance. The goal here isn't just visibility, it's contrast. Cool moonlight in the shadows, warm firelight in the streets. That temperature difference is what really sells the mood. So here's the fire VFX and here's the torch model. I'm going to combine these with a point light to turn the whole setup into a prefab. That way I can drop torches all over the town without rebuilding the effect every time. And the real advantage here is flexibility. If I decide later that the light intensity is too strong, or the flicker feels off, I only have to adjust it once, and every torch updates automatically. Small workflow decisions like this save a lot of time, especially once the scene starts getting more complex. So as I place these, I'm not necessarily spacing them evenly. I kind of want pockets of warmth and then pockets of shadow. Some streets should feel a little safer than others. And this is where it starts to come together. Next, I wanted to create a cobblestone texture for the ground. The dirt texture just wasn't going to work and didn't really quite match the darker tone that we're going for. So I used Nano Banana Pro here to generate a seamless tileable cobblestone texture that just fits the color and the palette of the town that we're going for. It came out a little brighter than I wanted, but that's easy to fix. The important thing isn't perfection, it's cohesion. Every surface in the scene should feel like it belongs in the same world. Once I have the new cobblestone texture assigned to the terrain and have it looking good, I am going to go ahead and open up the image directly in GIMP. So I'm going to adjust the hue and lightness just enough to push it darker and slightly more muted so it fits the gritty tone of the town. Now the nice thing about editing the texture directly is that I can save it, jump back over into Unity, and then immediately see the update in the scene. So that quick back and forth makes styling in the look a lot easier. I'm not necessarily guessing, I'm just evaluating it in context. To give it that extra worn, dingy look, I start blending in a dirt texture along the center of the streets and around the edges. I don't want a perfectly uniform cobblestone surface, that feels new. Subtle variation makes it look walked on, used, a little neglected. I'm basically painting in history. One thing I forgot to capture here on camera was generating a normal map for the cobblestone texture. This adds some nice surface detail and makes a big difference once the moonlight hits it. The highlights and shadows start to break up naturally, and the ground finally feels dimensional instead of flat. Now I'm going to step away from the town itself and focus on the sky, because if we want this moonlight to feel believable, it needs a source. I'm creating a panoramic skybox, something with a deep star-filled night that sports the cool glow we've already built into the scene. And for this I'm using Omnicraft to generate a custom night sky panorama. The goal isn't just stars, it's atmosphere. Something subtle and dark that feels like it's actually casting the moonlight over the town. After generating the panorama, I import the EXR file into Unity and create a new Skybox material from it. Then in the environment settings, I assign that material as the active Skybox for the scene. Now right away you can see it's a little brighter than I'd like, but that's easy to fix. I just lower the exposure on the Skybox material until it feels deeper and more subdued. The sky shouldn't overpower the town, it should support it. Now it's time to build the dungeon entrance. So I'm using the modular wall pieces from the Mystic Dungeon pack, not to construct a full fortress, but just enough of the front and sides to imply scale. The goal here is suggestion. If you frame it correctly, you don't need the entire structure, just enough silhouette to make it feel massive and ominous. It also conveniently blocks the player's view of anything beyond it and helps contain the player space inside the town. So it's doing double duty, atmosphere and level design. For some finishing touches, I wired this into my background music manager. It lets me assign both ambient music and environmental sound to the scene. I generate a subtle, moody track using Suno and layer in nighttime ambience, crickets and wind to give the town a sense of life beyond what you can see. Visuals set the stage, but sound is what makes it believable. Those small details are what really make the scene feel inhabited. The last thing I'm going to add to really tie everything together is a subtle bloom effect. The scene already includes a global volume for sky and fog, so this is the perfect place to add a bloom component. What bloom does is gently amplify the brightest parts of the scene, in this case the torches. It softens the edges of the light and gives that warm glow a bit more presence. The key is restraint. Too much bloom looks artificial. Just enough makes the fire feel like it's actually emitting light into the air. I also wrote a small Firelight flicker script that can be added to any light, and it subtly varies the intensity over time, giving the torches that natural dancing glow. Without it, the light kind of feels static, but with it, the whole scene feels alive. And that's the transformation. Same asset pack, completely different feel. Just by tightening the layout, controlling the lighting, adding contrast, and paying attention to small details, we turned a bright medieval town into something darker and more atmospheric. If you're interested, I'll have links to the asset packs, tools, and the scripts I use down in the description. Remember, you don't need entirely new assets to build something unique. You just need intention.